He had it all: money, power, and a life most people could only dream of. But when success clouded his judgment, he made a choice that would haunt him forever. Years ago, he walked away, leaving behind a wife and a young son, convinced that they were holding him back from the life he truly deserved. No goodbyes, no explanations, just a clean break from his past. Time passed, and his wealth only grew. He had everything he thought he wanted: luxury cars, high-rise apartments, and a circle of powerful friends. Yet something always felt off. He buried the guilt, convincing himself that it was all for the best. Until one night, everything changed. Sitting in his penthouse, flipping through TV channels, he froze. On the screen was a young man, confident, successful, and unmistakably familiar. His heart pounded as he leaned closer. Could it be? The son he abandoned all those years ago. Now standing in the spotlight? A flood of emotions hit him at once. Pride. Regret. Fear. He had spent years running from the past, but now it had found him. And what he was about to discover would shake his world in ways he never saw coming. His breath caught in his throat as he watched the young man on the screen. The same sharp eyes. The same determined expression. There was no doubt it was his son. The boy he had abandoned all those years ago was now standing under the bright lights, his voice steady, his presence commanding. He was being interviewed, the caption beneath him flashing: "Rising star shares his journey from struggle to success." The father turned up the volume, his hands shaking. The host smiled at the young man and leaned forward. "You've had quite a journey, haven't you? Growing up without a father, facing hardships most people can't imagine, and yet, here you are. Tell us, what kept you going?" The father's stomach twisted. He hadn't expected this. He had thought of his son over the years, but only in passing. Never had he imagined the boy would end up here on national television, telling the world his story. The young man took a deep breath before answering. "I guess when you don't have a choice, you keep moving forward. My mother. She gave up everything to make sure I had a chance. She worked long hours, took on extra jobs. She never let me see her struggle, but I knew. I always knew." His voice tightened. "And I promised myself that one day, I'd make her proud." The father swallowed hard. He hadn't thought about her in years, hadn't wondered what had happened after he walked away. He had told himself that she'd move on, that she'd be fine without him. But now, hearing his son's words, he knew the truth. She had suffered. She had fought to raise their child alone while he had chased wealth and success, leaving them behind as if they were nothing. The host continued, eyes filled with admiration. "And now, here you are, a rising entrepreneur, a role model to so many. What would you say to the person who abandoned you? If you were watching right now?" The young man's jaw tightened, and for a moment, silence filled the studio. Then he let out a slow breath, his gaze hard. "I'd tell him he missed out. That he left thinking we weren't good enough for him. But the truth is, he wasn't good enough for us." The father felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. He turned off the TV, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had walked away all those years ago without a second thought. And now, the son he barely knew had become everything he had hoped to be without him. But something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. He needed to know more. What had his son been through? What had his wife suffered? He had spent so long believing he had moved on, but now, the past was clawing its way back, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he could run from it anymore. That night, sleep didn't come. He stared at the ceiling, memories rushing in. The moment he left, the life he built afterward, the silence that had followed. He had thought he was free, but now the weight of his choices pressed down on him like never before. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for his past. His hands trembled as he typed his son's name into the search bar. Article after article appeared. Headlines praised his success, his determination. There were interviews, videos, even a foundation he had started to help struggling single mothers. And then, he saw a photo of his wife. Older, tired, but still carrying that quiet strength he remembered. The caption beneath it made his stomach turn. The woman who never gave up a mother's fight for her son's future. He clicked on the article, his heart racing. The words blurred as he read about the years he had missed. The eviction notices. The nights she went without food to make sure their son ate. The relentless jobs. The sacrifices. Regret twisted inside him. He had told himself they would be fine without him. That he had done them a favor by leaving. But the truth was, he had abandoned them when they needed him most. He shut the laptop, his hands clenched into fists. He had spent years convincing himself that the past was behind him. But now it was staring him in the face. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea what to do next. He needed to see them. He needed to know if there was any way, any chance he could make things right. But deep down, a terrifying thought crept in. What if it was too late? He sat in his office, the city skyline stretching before him, but for the first time in years, it all felt meaningless. The luxury, the power, the life he had built, it was nothing compared to what he had left behind. His son had grown up without him, had fought through struggles he never had to face. And the woman he once loved had carried that burden alone. The guilt gnawed at him, relentless. He had walked away believing he was doing what was best for himself, but in doing so, he had destroyed the very people who had once been his world. Now he needed to see them. Not because he deserved a second chance, but because he couldn't live another day without knowing if there was any way to make things right. He spent hours researching, trying to find a way to reach his son without causing a scene. His son was a public figure now, his story inspiring thousands. A direct approach wouldn't work. What could he even say after all these years? Instead, he found an upcoming event where his son was scheduled to speak. A charity gala for single mothers. The irony wasn't lost on him. The night of the gala, he stood at the back of the crowded ballroom, his heart pounding. His son was on stage, speaking with the same confidence that had stunned him on television. "My mother is the reason I stand before you today," he said. "She sacrificed everything, gave me the strength to believe that no matter where you come from, your future is still yours to create." The audience erupted into applause, but the father could only stare. Then the host spoke. "And we have a special guest tonight, his mother, the woman who raised him against all odds." The father's breath caught as she walked onto the stage. She had aged, but there was still that quiet grace, that resilience in her eyes. The room stood for her, applauding as she took the microphone. "I did what any mother would do," she said simply. "I fought for my child because he deserved better." Her gaze swept the room, and for a moment it landed on him. He froze. Did she recognize him? The moment passed, but he knew she had seen him. The gala ended and people mingled, but he couldn't move. His feet felt rooted to the floor as he watched his son speak with guests, smiling, laughing, so sure of himself. And then, as if sensing something, his son turned. Their eyes met. For a second, neither moved. Then his son's expression hardened. He excused himself from the conversation and walked straight toward him. "You shouldn't be here." The words were cold, but the pain behind them was undeniable. "I know," the father admitted. I needed to see you." His son crossed his arms. "Why?" "Because you saw me on TV? Because now I'm someone worth knowing?" The accusation hit like a punch to the gut. "No," he said quietly. "Because I realized what I did and I can't live with it anymore." His son shook his head. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up years later and act like you suddenly care." "I never stopped caring," the father said, his voice thick. "I was just too much of a coward to face what I had done." His son let out a sharp laugh. "Coward? That's an understatement." He looked away, his jaw tight. "You left us. You let my mother struggle, let me grow up thinking I wasn't good enough for my own father. And now you want what? Forgiveness?" The father's throat tightened. "I don't deserve that. I know I don't. But I needed to see you, even if just once, to tell you that I was wrong. That I regret everything. that I am so proud of you." His son stared at him, and for a moment the anger wavered, replaced by something else. Confusion. Pain. Then, a voice interrupted. "That's enough." His wife stood behind them, her expression unreadable. "This isn't the time or place for this." The father turned to her, 1,000 apologies on his lips. Don't," she cut him off. "You don't get to stand here and act like a changed man. You left, and we learned to live without you." He swallowed hard. "I know, and I don't expect anything from you. But I need you to know that I hate myself for what I did." She exhaled slowly, then looked at their son. "Go back inside. I'll handle this." For a moment his son hesitated, then walked away, his shoulders tense. When he was gone, she turned back to the father. "Why now?" "Because I saw what I had lost," he admitted. "I told myself for years that I made the right choice, but I didn't. I hurt you. I hurt him, and I'll never forgive myself for it." She studied him, her expression softer now, but still guarded. "You can't undo the past." "I know," he said, "but if there's any way to make amends." She shook her head. "That's not up to me. That's up to him." He nodded, understanding. "I just needed to say, I'm sorry." She sighed. "I don't know if he'll ever forgive you. But give him time. He deserves that much." He watched her walk away, realizing that for the first time in years, he felt something real. Not success. Not wealth. Just the raw, painful truth of his mistakes. Days passed, then weeks. He didn't reach out again. He had done enough damage. But one evening, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. A single message appeared. "I'm not ready to talk. But maybe one day." He stared at it for a long time, tears burning in his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start.